The first thing Cordelia Marlowe noticed about the Duke of Greymere's West Saloon was that its blue-enamel clock was lying. It was not a dramatic lie. No one had forged a signature, ruined a reputation, or whispered behind a fan. The little French mantel clock simply chimed 9, while the great hall clock beyond the open doors had not yet reached the hour, and 7 minutes later. The deeper bell sounded through Greymere House with the solemn authority of something too large to be doubted. Cordelia glanced from one doorway to the other, counted backward without meaning to, and knew precisely how far the blue clock had strayed. "You are doing it again," her father murmured beside her. Sir Almeric Marlowe held a glass of port with the resigned expression of a man watching rain settle over a picnic. "Doing what?" Cordelia asked. "Measuring the room." "I was measuring the clock. That is worse." His mouth twitched despite himself. Cordelia lowered her eyes to hide a smile. The supper at Greymere House had gathered 30 people beneath chandeliers, bright enough to flatter diamonds and expose every imperfection in a face. Silk whispered across carpets. Footmen moved with silver dishes through currents of conversation about Parliament, horses, marriages, and a new opera half the company claimed to have despised while quoting it perfectly. Cordelia had no wish to be the most interesting woman present. Experience had taught her that interesting women were often invited into conversations for the same reason. Unusual insects were pinned beneath glass. A gentleman wanted to look closely, announce what made them peculiar, and then move on. She had learned to survive such rooms by speaking when she had something worth saying, and keeping silent when she did not. The method had left her unmarried at 31, and, to her own surprise, increasingly content. 7 minutes, she said quietly. Sir Almeric sighed. "Cordelia, it is 7 minutes fast." Unfortunately, Mr. Halford, a red-faced gentleman standing close enough to hear, turned toward her. "What is the West clock? Good heavens! You can tell that by looking at it, by listening." Mr. Halford laughed, as though she had performed a card trick. "I should hate to have a wife who could tell me every time I was 7 minutes late." 2 nearby gentlemen smiled. A woman behind them lifted her fan. Cordelia recognized the familiar shape of the moment. She could soften herself now. She could laugh, pretend she had guessed, and allow the men to feel generous for forgiving a woman who had almost sounded certain. She had performed that small surrender often enough in earlier seasons. It had never purchased anything she wanted to keep. "Then you should endeavor to be punctual," she said. Mr. Halford blinked. Someone choked back a laugh. Cordelia's father closed his eyes for one weary second. "You are far too clever for a husband, Cordelia." He said it with affection. That was what made the words more difficult to hate. Sir Almeric did not mean to wound her. He meant to explain the world as he believed it existed. Once, she might have argued. At 23, she would have told him that intelligence did not become unbecoming merely because it belonged to a woman. At 26, she would have tried to persuade him that a good marriage ought to tolerate truth. At 29, she had stopped wasting breath on men who considered her mind an inconvenient piece of furniture. Now, she only smiled. "That is fortunate," she said. "I haven't been looking for one." The words carried farther than she intended. Conversation shifted around them. Not silence exactly. Society rarely granted anyone the dignity of complete silence, but attention bent. Cordelia felt it happen before she looked up. Across the room stood Maximilian Eversham, 7th Duke of Greymere, one hand resting lightly on the back of a chair. He was taller than most of the men near him and quieter than all of them. His dark evening coat was severe, his expression controlled, but his eyes were fixed on Cordelia with unmistakable interest, not amusement. That unsettled her more. Lady Genevieve Ashendon stood several feet from him, in pale gold silk, perfectly arranged and perfectly still. Sir Leander Carroway, near the fireplace, had also turned. Cordelia knew Leander well enough to recognize calculation when it sharpened his face. Maximilian crossed the room only after finishing the sentence he had been speaking to an elderly lord. He did not hurry, which somehow made everyone else's curiosity look vulgar. Miss Marlowe. His bow was precise. Cordelia curtsied. Your Grace, you said the clock is 7 minutes fast. Mr. Halford brightened, apparently pleased to see the Duke join the entertainment. Cordelia looked directly at Maximilian. I did. How do you know? There was no mockery in the question. She paused, almost suspicious of its simplicity. The blue clock chimed before the hall clock. I noted the interval. Maximilian glanced toward the west saloon doors. You counted 7 minutes. I did not need to count each second. No. The musicians began the second movement shortly after the first chime. It is marked in common time and was played at approximately 80 beats to the minute. They had not finished when the hall clock struck. The difference could not have been 5 minutes, and it was certainly not 10. Mr. Halford stared at her. Cordelia instantly regretted saying so much. There it was again. The terrible little moment when men decided whether female competence was charming or offensive. Maximilian only nodded. And you allowed for the musicians varying the tempo. Cordelia's surprise must have shown. Yes, then we should verify it. He turned to a footman. Mr. Ellis, ask whether the hall clock was corrected this week. The footman bowed and vanished. No one laughed now. Cordelia disliked the relief that moved through her. She did not want the Duke's title to make her correct. She wanted the clock to do that. Maximilian seemed to understand. He looked back at her. If the hall clock is wrong instead, I assume you will tell me, if you ask. The corner of his mouth shifted. I am asking in advance. The footman returned with the house steward, who confirmed that the hall clock had been checked by the Greymere clockmaker 3 days earlier. Maximilian took out his watch, compared it, and then stepped to the blue clock. 7 minutes, he said. Almost exactly. Mr. Halford gave a bewildered laugh. Well, Your Grace, I suppose Miss Marlowe has saved your household from losing half its mornings. Hardly, Cordelia said. Someone would have noticed eventually. Would they? Maximilian asked. Perhaps. You did. The words were quiet. Cordelia felt them more keenly than praise. He had not called her brilliant. He had not made a spectacle of her. He had simply observed that she had seen what others had not. Sir Almeric shifted beside her, perhaps sensing that the conversation had gone somewhere he had not intended. Mr. Halford shook his head. Still, I maintain that a wife who notices everything would be a dangerous creature. The Duke turned to him, only to a husband who depends upon being wrong unnoticed. This time the laughter belonged to the room, not to Cordelia. Mr. Halford coloured, though Maximilian's tone had remained mild enough to leave him an exit. Cordelia looked at the Duke. He was watching her, not the man he had corrected. Their eyes met. Something unguarded passed through his expression. So brief she might have imagined it. Recognition, perhaps, or amusement without cruelty. Cordelia felt a reply rise before she could stop it. Then I fear accuracy may be an expensive habit, Your Grace. Most worthwhile habits are. His answer came easily. She smiled. This time he smiled too, and the difference between being laughed at and being laughed with felt unexpectedly large. Across the room, Lady Genevieve's fan had stopped moving. Sir Leander lifted his glass without drinking. Cordelia noticed both things because noticing had always been easier than pretending not to see. Her fingers brushed the small reticule at her wrist, where a narrow green baize sleeve protected the little glass prism that had belonged to her mother. She did not take it out. She only felt the familiar shape through the fabric and thought of light divided into colors. No one saw until something precise revealed them. The Duke looked toward the blue clock once more. "Mr. Ellis," he said to the steward, "have the clockmaker come tomorrow morning. I want that clock properly regulated." "Yes, Your Grace." Maximilian's gaze returned to Cordelia before the steward had even bowed away. That was the moment she understood. The clock was no longer the most interesting thing he had noticed. On the morning of May 8th, the blue-enamel clock in the West Saloon was opened like a patient under careful examination. The Greymere clockmaker, a narrow-shouldered man with silver spectacles and a leather roll of tools, removed the back panel while Maximilian stood near the mantel and watched the tiny brass wheels turn. He had not expected to remain for the entire adjustment. There were letters on his desk, a steward waiting over tenant accounts, and 2 political notes requiring answers before noon. Yet he stayed. "The movement is sound, Your Grace," the clockmaker said. "It has simply been gaining. I can regulate it." "Against the hall clock?" Maximilian asked. "Yes, Your Grace. I checked the hall clock first." The man made a minute adjustment, waited, compared, and repeated the process until the 2 timepieces agreed. When the blue clock finally marked the same minute as the hall clock, Maximilian felt an unreasonable satisfaction. The problem had been ordinary. The woman who noticed it was not. 2 days had passed since supper, and he had found himself remembering Cordelia Marlowe's expression when the room had expected her to make herself smaller. She had not become angry. She had not pleaded to be understood. She had simply declined the invitation to pretend. "Keep it here," he said, when the clockmaker began closing his tools. "I want it left where it is." The man looked faintly puzzled. "Of course, Your Grace." Maximilian glanced once at the blue enamel face. "And send the usual account to my steward." By 11:30, his carriage had stopped before Marlowe House. He had sent his card ahead according to custom, but the footman's expression still changed almost imperceptibly when the Duke of Greymere stepped inside. Maximilian disliked that particular change. It followed him everywhere. Doors opened faster. Backs straightened. Opinions softened before he had asked for any. Sir Almeric received him in the front drawing-room, and Cordelia entered several minutes later with her married aunt, who settled near the window with embroidery and the serenity of a woman who understood why she had been invited to remain. Cordelia wore pale grey muslin with a narrow blue ribbon at the waist. Nothing about it demanded attention. Maximilian noticed it anyway. "Your Grace," she said, curtsying, "Miss Marlowe." Sir Almeric gestured toward the tea table. "I'm afraid you'll find us less exciting in daylight." "I'm often grateful for daylight," Maximilian replied. "It makes certain things easier to see." Cordelia's eyes flickered with amusement. Sir Almeric did not appear to notice. Tea was poured. The first minutes passed through safe subjects: weather, a forthcoming musicale, the carriages already crowding Bond Street. Maximilian endured them because propriety was not an enemy, merely because it was tedious. When Sir Almeric was called away to speak with his solicitor in the library, Cordelia's aunt remained in clear sight, her embroidery hoop rising and falling with diplomatic concentration. Maximilian set down his cup. "The clock has been corrected." Cordelia looked at him. "I'm relieved to hear your household has survived the crisis." Barely. Her mouth curved. Did the clockmaker discover anything dramatic? No. It was simply gaining. That is usually how errors become troublesome. They're boring at first. He smiled despite himself. "You make inaccuracy sound morally suspicious, only when people become attached to it." The answer came lightly, but there was something behind it. Maximilian leaned back. People often revealed more when power did not crowd them. "May I ask you something less safe than the weather?" Cordelia glanced toward her aunt, then back at him. "You may ask. Why did you stop wanting marriage?" Her expression changed so slightly that another man might have missed it. The humor did not disappear. It moved behind a door. "That is rather direct." "Yes. Do dukes generally ask women why they have failed to secure husbands?" "I don't know. I've made a point of avoiding the species whenever possible." She laughed before she could prevent it, and the sound altered the room. Maximilian felt it in a place he preferred not to examine too closely. "I didn't say I failed," she said. "No." He waited. Cordelia studied him with the same concentration she had given the clock. "And if I don't answer, then I'll assume the question was unwelcome and ask you something else." The guardedness in her face eased by a degree. "I stopped because I grew tired of being examined." Examined as though marriage were an appointment for which I had presented myself badly prepared. I was expected to be accomplished but not authoritative, informed but not certain, amusing but never at a man's expense, curious but only about things that made other people comfortable. Maximilian said nothing. She looked almost surprised by his silence. "That was more of an answer than I intended." "Then I won't make you defend it." "You don't disagree?" "I didn't say that." Her eyes sharpened. "Ah, I said I wouldn't make you defend an answer simply because I asked for it." Something warmer entered her expression. "That is an unusual distinction. Most people agree with me before I have finished speaking." Cordelia tilted her head. "That sounds convenient. It's intolerable." This time her laugh was softer. "You're serious." "Entirely. A man can become very stupid when everyone around him calls agreement loyalty." The admission cost him more than expected. Cordelia's gaze rested on him without pity. He was absurdly grateful for that. "Then you require disagreement as a form of public service," she said. "I'd settle for honesty." Her eyes dropped to the tea table, where sunlight had reached the edge of her reticule. For a moment she seemed to make a decision. Then she opened it and drew out a narrow green baize sleeve. "My mother used to say honest observation was easier when one remembered how little the eye sees at first." She slipped a small glass prism from the fabric. Maximilian did not touch it. "May I?" "Yes." She placed it across his open palm. Their fingertips brushed. The contact lasted an instant, but both became still. Cordelia withdrew first, not sharply, simply with awareness. Maximilian looked down at the prism because looking directly at her felt suddenly less safe than politics. The glass was small enough to fit between two fingers, its edges softened by use. It was hers? Yes, she liked natural philosophy, though my father thought prisms were a poor use of a drawing room. "Your mother disagreed?" "Frequently. I believe I would have liked her." Cordelia's face gentled. "I think she would have asked you uncomfortable questions." "Then I'm certain of it." He turned the prism toward the window. Sunlight entered and broke faintly across the white cloth into color. Cordelia watched the light rather than him. "One thing," she said, "and more inside it than anyone sees until the angle is right. Maximilian looked at her then. Is that what you think people are? Sometimes. And sometimes a bad clock is only a bad clock. He laughed, and she joined him. When he returned the prism, he held it by one end, so she could take the other without touching him again, unless she chose to. She noticed, he knew she noticed, because her eyes lifted briefly to his before her fingers closed around the glass. "Will you come to Greymere House on Friday?" he asked. "My father has already accepted for both of us." "That was not what I asked." A pause. Her aunt's needle continued moving by the window. Cordelia slipped the prism back into its green sleeve. "Yes," she said, "I'll come." Maximilian rose a few minutes later, with all the formal courtesies propriety required. Yet, as the footman opened the front door, he carried away something far less orderly than satisfaction. For most of his life, people had tried to discover what answer pleased the Duke of Greymere. Cordelia Marlowe, he suspected, might be the first woman who would tell him the truth even when it did not. By the evening of May 10th, Cordelia had discovered that being invited twice to Greymere House in the same week attracted more notice than being overlooked there entirely. At the formal dinner, Lady Genevieve Ashendon greeted her with flawless civility and eyes that measured everything. Sir Leander Carraway offered a bow polished enough to pass for warmth, until one noticed that he never wasted charm without expecting a return. Cordelia noticed. She also noticed Maximilian before she allowed herself to look directly at him. He stood near the fireplace, speaking with an elderly peer, his attention apparently fixed upon the conversation. Yet when Cordelia entered with Sir Almeric, his gaze found her almost at once. There was no smile at first, only recognition. Then his expression altered by the smallest degree, and something inside her answered before common sense could object. She had spent too many years learning the dangers of interpreting male attention generously. Admiration could turn patronizing within a sentence. Interest could become competition the moment she knew something a gentleman did not. She reminded herself of that as they went in to dinner. Fate, or a hostess with excellent instincts for social tension, placed Cordelia within conversational reach of both Sir Leander and the Duke. The opening courses passed safely through discussions of horses, a forthcoming charity concert, and a quarrel over an opera singer. Trouble arrived with the fish. A gentleman further down the table mentioned complaints from several estate tenants about a badly maintained road after winter flooding. Sir Leander lifted his wineglass. Roads are always declared intolerable by people who wish someone else to pay for them. A few men smiled. Cordelia kept her attention on her plate. She had no intention of volunteering an opinion merely because silence made other people curious. Maximilian said, "You believe the complaint itself is usually the problem. I believe proprietors are too easily frightened by noise," Leander replied. "If every tenant who dislikes a rut receives a new road, an estate will soon be governed from the stable yard." "That seems an economical way to describe a broken axle," Cordelia said before she could stop herself. Leander turned toward her. "You disagree, Miss Marlowe?" The invitation sounded courteous. It was not. She knew this sort of exchange. A man asked a woman what she thought only after arranging the room, so that any firm answer could be called arrogance. Cordelia set down her fork. "I think a complaint may be exaggerated and still describe a real defect, but a landowner cannot repair every inconvenience." "No, then surely judgment belongs to the person responsible for the estate." "Of course." Leander smiled, believing he had brought her safely back into agreement. Cordelia continued, which is why the person responsible should want accurate information before deciding. His smile thinned, and if the tenants exaggerate, then facts will expose the exaggeration. You have remarkable confidence in facts. They are generally less expensive than repairing the wrong problem. A quiet laugh came from Maximilian, not the social laugh of part 1, offered to relieve tension. This one escaped him. Cordelia turned her head. He had looked down briefly, but when his eyes returned to hers, there was unmistakable amusement in them. It pleased her more than it should have. Leander leaned back. You make estate management sound very simple. I suspect it is difficult enough without guessing. Lady Genevieve, seated across from them, raised her wine-glass delicately. Miss Marlowe has a talent for certainty. Cordelia heard the velvet over the blade. Only when I am certain. How enviable. Maximilian entered the conversation before Genevieve could sharpen it further. Suppose the road serves 3 tenant farms and 1 market route, he said. His tone changed the nature of the discussion. No longer entertainment. A real question. Repairs are costly. Delaying them is also costly if carts cannot reach market reliably. Which expense matters more? Leander answered first. The immediate one. Repairs can wait until after harvest. Cordelia said nothing. Maximilian looked at her. Miss Marlowe? She hesitated. I need to know how often the road is impassable, what is being transported, whether another route exists, and how much longer that route is. Assume there is another route. How much longer? A faint smile touched his mouth. 3 miles. Then I'd want the number of weekly journeys before answering. Leander laughed. At this rate, Your Grace, we shall require ledgers before dessert. Cordelia felt the old irritation rise. Maximilian did not look away from her. Assume 6 farms use the road regularly, not 3. Produce goes to market twice weekly. Cordelia considered it. Then postponing repair could cost more in labor, horse fatigue, spoiled goods, and lost market time than the repair itself, depending upon the damage. So you would repair it? Probably. Probably. You have not told me the cost. A second laugh escaped him, quieter than the first. Quite right. Leander reached for his glass. You see, Your Grace. This is precisely the difficulty with clever people. Every answer produces another question. Cordelia had heard versions of the sentence all her life. She expected Maximilian to dismiss it politely. Instead, he said, good decisions generally survive questions. He then gave his own view. I would repair the road before harvest. Delay tends to convert maintenance into emergency expenditure. Cordelia nodded slowly. That assumes the drainage has been examined. Maximilian turned toward her. The table seemed to narrow. You think I'm wrong? Possibly. Someone further down stopped speaking. Genevieve's gaze sharpened. Sir Almeric, who had been listening from 2 places away, became very still. Maximilian rested one hand beside his plate. Where am I wrong? Cordelia searched his face for the trap. There was none, no indulgent challenge, no expectation that she retreat and tell him she had only meant to add a minor thought. He wanted the answer. That realization unsettled her more deeply than hostility would have done. If the drainage caused the damage, she said, repairing only the road surface before harvest means paying twice, once now and again after the next heavy rain. Maximilian did not reply immediately. Cordelia felt every old instinct urging her to soften the statement. She resisted. At last he nodded. Yes, the word was simple. I was wrong. Silence lasted 1 heartbeat longer than good manners required. Leander gave a short laugh. Surely not wrong, Your Grace, merely incomplete. Maximilian looked at him. Incomplete enough to waste money is wrong enough for me. Cordelia could not help it. She smiled. His gaze returned to her, and this time he smiled too. There was nothing triumphant in it, nothing flirtatious enough for anyone to accuse them of impropriety. Yet, Cordelia felt as though a private door had opened between them. He had asked where he was wrong, and when she told him, he had not punished her for answering. For years, she had been taught that harmony required a woman to protect a man from the discomfort of correction. Maximilian appeared to regard correction as useful. It was a dangerously attractive quality. Later, when the ladies had withdrawn to the drawing room, Genevieve stood near a gilt table and watched Cordelia speak with an elderly countess. She waited until Leander entered with the gentleman before crossing toward him beneath the cover of general conversation. "You were rather interested in Miss Marlowe once," she murmured. Leander's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Was I?" Sir Almeric seemed to think so. "Sir Almeric thinks many things. Did you abandon the idea?" Leander glanced across the room. Maximilian had just entered. His attention moved past 3 eligible young women and settled unmistakably on Cordelia. "There was never an idea worth discussing," Leander said. Genevieve followed his gaze. "How fortunate." "Why?" Her fan opened with a soft snap. "Because His Grace is beginning to look at her as though cleverness were an inducement." By May 14th, Cordelia had learned that there were 2 ways a woman might become visible in London society, and she distrusted them both. Beauty made men look. Intelligence made them test. At Lady Wexbourne's ball, beneath 3 tiers of chandeliers and enough candlelight to make every diamond in the room appear twice its size, Cordelia found herself subjected to the second form of attention before the first set had even begun. "Miss Marlowe," said Mr. Tressingham, a cheerful young man whose enthusiasm was exceeded only by his confidence. "We have a dispute that requires your judgment." Cordelia glanced at the 2 gentlemen flanking him. "That sounds dangerous. Only arithmetic. Then it sounds worse." The men laughed. Tressingham held up 4 gloved fingers. "If a carriage leaves Grosvenor Square at 6:30, travels at 8 miles an hour, stops 20 minutes to change horses, and arrives in Richmond at—" "Mr. Tressingham," Cordelia interrupted, gently. "If your carriage travels at 8 miles an hour through London streets at 6:30, your first difficulty will not be arithmetic." One of his companions barked a laugh. The other looked disappointed, as though she had refused to perform a trick. "Come now," he said. "Surely you can calculate it." "Certainly." Cordelia lifted her fan. "But I have no wish to spend a ball calculating imaginary carriages for gentlemen who possess watches." Tressingham colored, though not unpleasantly. "You are merciless." "No, merely off-duty." She turned away before another challenge could be invented. It had happened 3 times in the past week. At dinner, a gentleman asked her to settle an argument about interest. At a morning visit, another presented a riddle in Greek, as though she were an unusually educated parrot. No one had been openly cruel. That almost made the irritation harder to explain. Admiration, she was discovering, could still diminish a person when it insisted on turning her into entertainment. She moved toward the edge of the ballroom and stopped beside a marble column, grateful for a moment in which no one required an answer. Across the room, Maximilian was speaking with a marquess. He had been surrounded since his arrival. That, Cordelia supposed, was the social fate of a duke. He could not cross 10 feet without becoming the center of someone else's ambition. Lady Genevieve Ashendon stood nearby in white satin embroidered with gold thread. She looked as composed as a portrait and twice as difficult to read. Maximilian's eyes shifted past the Marquess's shoulder and found Cordelia. He did not smile immediately. He finished what he was saying, bowed, and only then began moving through the room. Cordelia's pulse behaved with irritating disloyalty. She had spent years becoming sensible about men. Maximilian Eversham was making sensibility feel less like wisdom and more like an unfinished argument. Before he reached her, another gentleman intercepted Cordelia. Lord Perrowell was old enough to know better and important enough not to care. "Miss Marlowe, settle something for us. How many turns of a waltz would place a lady nearest the west doors if she began opposite the orchestra?" Cordelia stared at him. "Are you planning an escape? We are discussing geometry. At a ball, where better? A schoolroom." Several people laughed. Perrowell grinned. "You see, she cannot resist." The words were meant as praise. Cordelia felt herself become an exhibit again. "I can resist perfectly well," she said. "I am doing so now." "Oh, don't be severe. We merely wish to see whether your reputation is deserved." "My reputation for attending balls without being examined?" A shadow moved at Perrowell's side. "That seems a reasonable ambition," Maximilian said. Perrowell turned quickly. "Your Grace." "We were only amusing ourselves." Maximilian's gaze rested on Cordelia for a moment before returning to him. "Were you?" His tone was mild enough to preserve the other man's dignity. "Then I should hate to interrupt." Perrowell laughed uncertainly. "Not at all." Maximilian looked at Cordelia. "Miss Marlowe, may I have this dance?" The musicians were arranging themselves for a country dance. Cordelia hesitated. She knew what the room would see. A duke rescuing a woman from foolish men. Gratitude was another role she had no wish to perform. "Is this your method of saving embarrassed women, Your Grace?" she asked quietly. His eyes warmed. "No, no, if rescue were my purpose, I would have asked sooner." The answer startled her. "Then, why are you asking now?" Maximilian held her gaze. "Because I want the dance." Nothing in his expression suggested charity. Nothing suggested display. The simplicity of it disarmed her more effectively than gallantry would have done. Cordelia closed her fan. "Then yes." He offered his hand. She placed her gloved fingers in his. The contact was correct, formal, entirely within the demands of the dance, yet it felt different from every touch they had exchanged before. Because this one was chosen, not accidental like the brush of their fingertips over her mother's prism, not merely practical like taking a gentleman's hand from a carriage. This was deliberate. Cordelia was aware of the warmth beneath his glove, the steadiness of his hold, and the fact that he neither tightened his fingers nor prolonged the contact beyond what the figure required. When the dancers separated, he released her at once. When the pattern brought them together again, he waited for her hand rather than reaching before she offered it. That restraint unsettled something inside her far more intimate than boldness might have done. "You are very quiet," he said when the dance brought them briefly side by side. "I am thinking. Should I be alarmed? Possibly. Good." I was beginning to fear I had become predictable. Cordelia looked at him. "You crossed a crowded ballroom to ask a woman with a reputation for correcting dukes to dance. I would not call that predictable. You have corrected me once, publicly, accurately. That was not the point. It was to me." The dancers turned. For several measures, conversation became impossible. Cordelia was absurdly grateful. Her body understood his nearness before her mind could classify it. She noticed the controlled strength of his movements, the way his attention never wandered when he spoke to her, and the faint crease beside his mouth when amusement threatened his composure. None of those things had anything to do with intellect. That realization frightened her more than being tested ever had. She had grown accustomed to being admired for what she knew and rejected for the certainty with which she knew it. She had not prepared herself for being desired without being asked to disguise either. At the next joining of hands, Maximilian's fingers closed lightly around hers. Cordelia returned the hold. The pressure lasted no longer than the figure permitted, but her awareness of it remained after they separated. "You dislike being made into a performance," he said. She glanced at him sharply. "You noticed. I am trying to. That sounds suspiciously modest for a duke. Do not repeat it. I have a reputation." She smiled. "For what?" "Certainty, mostly." "Then you should guard it more carefully. I find I am less attached to it than I was." His voice had lowered. The room still surrounded them, yet the exchange felt oddly private. When the dance ended, Maximilian bowed. He did not keep her hand after etiquette required its release. "Thank you." Cordelia curtsied. "You are welcome. Was it tolerable?" "Barely." His mouth curved. "I shall try to improve. That would be dangerous. You might encourage expectations." "Whose?" Before she could answer, Lady Genevieve approached with effortless grace. "Your Grace, Lord Ashendon has been looking for you." "Then I should not make him search the entire ballroom." Maximilian bowed first to Cordelia. "Miss Marlowe." There was nothing improper in the way he said her name, but Genevieve heard something in it. Cordelia saw that immediately. Maximilian moved away. Genevieve watched him go, then turned to Cordelia with a smile so polished it could have reflected candlelight. "You dance very well, thank you." I had not realized His Grace enjoyed surprises. Cordelia met her gaze. "Perhaps he does not consider a dance surprising." Genevieve's smile remained. "Perhaps." She moved on before courtesy could become confrontation. Cordelia exhaled slowly. Across the ballroom, Sir Leander had joined Genevieve near the card-room doors. He waited until no one stood close enough to hear clearly. "You were right," he murmured. Genevieve did not look at him. "About what?" "Greymere." Her fingers tightened once around her fan. Leander followed Maximilian's gaze back toward Cordelia. One scandal would make his interest politically inconvenient. Genevieve's expression did not change. "Then let us hope," she said softly, "that Miss Marlowe is as clever as everyone believes." By May 18th, Cordelia had begun to understand that being courted by a duke was less like receiving flowers and more like discovering that half of London had developed an opinion about where one ought to sit. Maximilian's carriage drew attention before it even turned into Hyde Park, though the interest sharpened when Cordelia was seen inside it beside him, with her married aunt seated opposite in perfectly respectable silence. Nothing about the arrangement could reasonably offend propriety. That did not prevent three matrons in passing carriages from looking as though they had already composed the announcement of an engagement. Cordelia had expected the scrutiny. What she had not expected was how little Maximilian appeared to enjoy being observed. "You look as though you'd rather be audited," she said as the carriage joined the slow procession beneath the spring trees. "I would," he replied. "Accounts at least have the decency to admit what they want." Her aunt's mouth twitched above her folded hands. Cordelia looked out at riders, curricles, phaetons, and carefully displayed marriages moving past them at a pace designed less for travel than inspection. "And what does everyone here want?" "To know whether I'm interested in you." The answer came without ornament. Cordelia turned back to him. "Are you?" Maximilian did not smile. Yes, the simplicity of it landed more strongly than gallantry. He allowed the silence to remain, as if he had no intention of rushing to make his answer easier for her. Cordelia became acutely aware of the measured roll of the carriage, the gloved hand resting on his knee, and her aunt looking with great dedication at a stand of chestnut trees. "That is inconvenient," Cordelia said at last. "For whom? I haven't decided." "Then I'll try not to decide for you." She glanced at him, and he knew at once that she had heard more in the sentence than humor. "You make that sound deliberate," she said. "It is becoming so." A mounted gentleman passed, bowing deeply to Maximilian. The Duke returned the greeting and waited until the rider had moved on. "My life has trained me to end problems quickly," he said. "A delayed decision becomes gossip. Gossip becomes pressure. Pressure becomes someone else's opportunity. That sounds exhausting. It's efficient. Those aren't the same thing." "No." He looked ahead toward the line of carriages. "I used to think they were." Cordelia studied him. "What changed your mind?" "A clock," she laughed. "Then Greymere House is in greater philosophical danger than I realized." The clock merely introduced the possibility. And what confirmed it? His eyes moved to hers, a woman who pointed out that repairing a road without checking the drainage might mean paying twice. Cordelia felt warmth rise before she could prevent it. He remembered, not merely that she had corrected him, but what she had said. "You remember small things," she said, "only the inconvenient ones. How fortunate for me." "Very." The word was quiet, and for one suspended moment the noise of Hyde Park seemed to move around rather than through the carriage. Then a gentleman, walking beside a lady near the rail, recognized Cordelia and stepped closer when the carriage slowed. Mr. Tressingham, still cheerful from his failed arithmetic challenge at the ball, bowed. "Miss Marlowe, I've been hoping to encounter you." Cordelia almost smiled at the menace hidden in such good humor. "That sounds alarming." "Not at all." "We've another question," the lady beside him laughed. "He's been saving it for you." Cordelia felt the old irritation before Tressingham even spoke. "Suppose," he began, "a gentleman has £2,000 invested at 4% and moves half into." Maximilian's gaze flicked to Cordelia. He did not interrupt. He waited. That mattered. Cordelia met his eyes and gave the slightest shake of her head, followed by an equally slight nod toward him. Permission, not rescue. Maximilian turned back to Tressingham. "Mr. Tressingham, Miss Marlowe is not accepting examinations today." Tressingham laughed uncertainly. "Examinations? You appear to have brought one without warning. I meant only to amuse her. Then you may take comfort in knowing she looks entirely unamused." Cordelia covered a smile with her glove. Tressingham had enough sense to recognize the exit offered to him. "I stand corrected." "A survivable condition," Cordelia said. He laughed, bowed again, and withdrew with his companion. Maximilian waited until they were beyond hearing. Was that acceptable? Cordelia turned to him. "You asked without speaking. I am learning economy. Be careful. It may become efficiency. Then you must stop me before I relapse. You are assuming I'll continue correcting you." "I am hoping you will." The warmth she had felt earlier deepened into something less manageable. Cordelia looked away before he could read too much. She had spent nearly 2 years being content with the life she had chosen. She had built that contentment carefully. After discovering that too many courtships began with fascination and ended with requests for moderation. Speak less firmly. Laugh more often. Allow a gentleman to explain something she already understood. Let him win an argument because harmony mattered. She had stopped looking for a husband because she had grown tired of auditioning for a smaller version of herself. Maximilian, inconveniently, remembered not only her arguments, but the moments she wished not to be made into one. That distinction frightened her more than flattery. Their circuit through the park ended without declaration or promise. When the carriage returned to Marlowe House, a footman lowered the step. Maximilian descended first. He turned and offered his hand. He did not reach for hers. He simply held his gloved palm open and waited. Cordelia looked at it for a heartbeat. She had accepted his hand in a dance 4 days earlier, where the movement had belonged partly to etiquette. This felt smaller, and therefore more personal. She placed her fingers in his. His hand closed only enough to steady her as she descended. Once her feet reached the pavement, he released her at once. "Thank you," she said. "I'm trying to become useful without becoming unbearable." "You have made ambitious progress." His eyes warmed. "Will you come to Greymere House on Thursday evening? If my aunt is invited." Behind her, the lady in question made a dignified sound that might have concealed laughter. "She is." Cordelia let herself smile. "Then I'll come." Later that afternoon at Ashendon House, Lady Genevieve stood beside a window while Sir Leander Carraway examined a miniature on the mantel without seeing it. He took her through Hyde Park, Genevieve said. "In daylight with a chaperone where half of London could observe the distinction," Leander replied. "Yes." Her voice remained cool, which means waiting for him to lose interest would be foolish. Leander glanced at her. "You have another suggestion." Genevieve closed her fan. "Greymere's West Saloon has a blue clock. I've seen it. It used to run fast. Everyone in the household knew it. A maid mentioned it last winter. And one of the footmen still jokes that the room keeps its own time. The Duke had it repaired." "Of course he did." Genevieve looked toward the street where the Greymere carriage had passed less than an hour before, but people remember faults longer than repairs. Leander's expression sharpened. "And what exactly do you propose?" Genevieve opened her fan again. "Nothing yet." Then she smiled without warmth. "I only propose that, if Miss Marlowe prides herself on knowing precisely what is true, we should discover how society treats her when the minutes themselves appear to disagree." On the evening of May 23rd, Greymere House seemed determined to prove that nothing dangerous could happen beneath enough candlelight. Music drifted from the drawing room. Servants carried wine and ices between groups of guests who had already rearranged themselves according to preference, rank, curiosity, and rumor. Cordelia stood near the open terrace doors, with her aunt seated several yards away, close enough to satisfy propriety and far enough to make conversation possible. Maximilian had managed to escape 2 political acquaintances and 1 determined dowager. He looked almost relieved to find Cordelia where the evening air softened the heat of the room. "You appear to have survived without being asked to calculate anyone's investments," he said. "The night is young. I can have the doors barred. That would create worse gossip. True, I should hate to be remembered as the Duke who imprisoned half of Mayfair to protect one woman from arithmetic." Cordelia smiled, but the humor did not quite reach the place in her that had been uneasy since Hyde Park. Maximilian noticed he had become irritatingly good at that. "What is it?" he asked. She looked toward her aunt, who was listening to an elderly lady with one ear and probably to Cordelia with the other. "You said the other day that you hoped I would continue correcting you. I meant it. Most men mean many things at the beginning." Maximilian did not answer too quickly, and later they discover that admiration is easier when it is occasional. He waited. Cordelia drew a breath. She had not intended to tell him this tonight, yet the careful way he held silence made evasion feel less necessary. Every serious courtship I have known eventually became an examination, she said, not an examination of whether I could manage a household or be kind or loyal. An examination of whether I could make a man feel more intelligent than I was. His expression changed, not anger, something quieter and more troubled. What did they ask you to do? Nothing so crude as asking me to become stupid. Her mouth curved without humor. That would have been almost refreshing. Then what? To hesitate before answering. To allow an error to pass because correction might embarrass someone. To pretend surprise when a gentleman explained what I already understood. One man told me that certainty in a woman was charming only in small doses. Maximilian's jaw tightened. I hope you told him exactly what dose he could expect. I was younger. I laughed. Because you found it amusing? Because I wanted him to like me. The admission landed harder than she expected. For a moment, she heard only the distant strings inside and the faint movement of carriage wheels beyond the square. That is why I stopped, she said. Not because I believed marriage impossible, because I was tired of being rewarded. Whenever I became less recognizable to myself. Maximilian looked at her for a long moment. I cannot promise never to be foolish. That would be a foolish promise. I cannot promise never to dislike being corrected. That would be suspicious. The corner of his mouth moved, then his expression steadied. But I would like permission to court the woman who already exists. Cordelia's breath caught. There was no audience in his voice, no grand declaration designed to impress the room beyond them. He simply extended his hand between them, palm open, and waited. The gesture was so restrained that she could have ignored it without embarrassment. That was precisely why she did not. Cordelia placed her hand in his. His fingers closed lightly around hers. He did not pull her closer. He did not turn the moment into possession. Their joined hands rested between them while the music continued behind the open doors. Cordelia became aware of the warmth beneath his glove, of the steadiness in his hand, and of how little he seemed to fear silence. You understand that permission to court me is not permission to manage me, she said. I am beginning to suspect you would inform me if I confused the two. Immediately. Good. His thumb did not move over her hand. Even that small restraint mattered. Then may I? Cordelia looked at him. She had spent nearly 2 years being certain she wanted nothing from courtship. Now she discovered that certainty could change without becoming a betrayal of the woman who had made it. Yes, she said, you may. Something softened in Maximilian's face. He released her only when voices approached from the drawing room. A married couple stepped onto the terrace. Cordelia withdrew her hand naturally, but the absence of his touch remained with her as they returned to the gathering. For the next half hour, nothing appeared unusual. Sir Almeric argued cheerfully about a parliamentary speech near the card room. Her aunt joined a group of ladies near the pianoforte. Maximilian was claimed by a political acquaintance. Cordelia accepted lemonade and listened to a widow describe her son's disastrous new hunter. Then Lady Genevieve Ashendon approached. Her face held exactly the right degree of concern. Miss Marlowe. Cordelia turned. Lady Genevieve, I'm sorry to alarm you, but your father has become unwell. Every pleasant thought vanished. My father, he seemed faint. He asked for somewhere quieter. He's in the West Saloon? Cordelia glanced toward the card-room. Sir Almeric was no longer visible from where she stood. Did he ask for me? He asked that someone find you. Genevieve touched Cordelia's sleeve briefly, as if urging haste. Please, I wouldn't delay. Cordelia handed her glass to a passing servant and crossed the house quickly. The corridors were still open to guests, though the West Saloon itself was quieter than the principal rooms. She entered at approximately 3 minutes before 11. Father? No answer. Lamps burned low against pale walls. The blue-enamel clock stood on the mantel exactly where it had always stood. The room was empty. Cordelia took 2 steps farther inside. Sir Almeric. The door opened behind her. Sir Leander Carroway entered. He stopped as though surprised. The expression was convincing for less than a second. Miss Marlowe. Cordelia's unease sharpened. Where is my father? Your father? Lady Genevieve said he was ill. Leander's brows rose. Then she misunderstood something. I've seen Sir Almeric this evening. He looked perfectly well. Cordelia turned toward the door. Leander moved no closer, but his voice stopped her. Since we are both here, perhaps there is something we should discuss. There is not. You haven't heard me. I have heard you before. His pleasant expression tightened. You are allowing Greymere to make a spectacle of you. That is an interesting accusation from a man who followed me into an empty room. I didn't follow you. Then our shared misfortune should end now. She moved toward the door. Cordelia. He had never been given permission to use her Christian name. She stopped because of the insult, not the intimacy. Sir Leander, you are not foolish. You know how this ends. A duke may admire novelty, but marriage is another matter. You need a practical match before he tires of proving how unconventional he can be. Cordelia looked at him, and something cold settled into clarity. Do you mean yourself? I mean that I once considered it. My father declined your inquiry. His eyes hardened. Your father was short-sighted. No, on that occasion, I think he saw very well. She opened the door. Good evening. Somewhere nearby, a dependable clock began to strike 11. Cordelia stepped into the corridor as the final stroke faded. Instinct made her glance back at the West Saloon mantel. The blue clock read approximately 17 minutes past 11. She stopped. 7 minutes fast had been its old error. It had been professionally corrected. She knew that. The difference now was not 7. It was 16. Her mind began arranging facts before fear could scatter them. She had entered only minutes ago. Leander had been with her scarcely longer than 3 minutes. Yet anyone using the West clock might believe something very different. Cordelia turned sharply toward the room, but Leander was still inside and had not yet emerged. She did not go back. Instead, she walked toward the main rooms, every step controlled. Behind her, at approximately 3 minutes after the hour, Leander finally left the West Saloon. Several minutes later, Lady Genevieve returned alone, along the same corridor, telling a footman with an easy smile that she had misplaced her fan. By May 27th, the story had already acquired details Cordelia had never lived. At Lady Ashenden's music-hall, she heard them whispered before anyone had the courage to speak them aloud. She had supposedly arranged to meet Sir Leander Carroway alone. She had supposedly remained with him for nearly 20 minutes. She had supposedly been clever enough to ensure that no one could prove exactly what had happened in the West Saloon. The most insulting part was not the accusation. It was the admiration hidden inside it. London had decided that if Cordelia Marlowe possessed an inconvenient mind, then perhaps she also possessed an inconvenient talent for deceit. she entered Lady Ashendon's drawing-room beside Sir Almeric, with her aunt close behind, and felt conversations soften as she passed, not stop. Society was too well trained for that. Fans lowered, eyes moved. A violinist tuned one string near the pianoforte, while servants carried champagne through a room that smelled of wax, flowers, and curiosity. Maximilian stood near the far wall, speaking with an elderly earl. His gaze found Cordelia almost immediately. He did not cross the room at once. She was grateful. If he hurried to her now, every watcher would call it rescue. Instead, he finished the conversation, bowed properly, and came to her. Only when doing so could be mistaken for ordinary courtesy by anyone determined to be charitable. Miss Marlowe, his voice was calm. Your Grace. His eyes searched her face. Are you well? Entirely. That was not true, but it was close enough to what she intended to become. Sir Almeric muttered, this absurd business should have died 3 days ago. Maximilian looked at him. Has anyone spoken to you directly? No, which has not prevented everyone from speaking around me. Before Maximilian could reply, Lady Genevieve approached. She wore pale green silk and an expression of reluctant concern so finely judged that Cordelia almost admired the craftsmanship. Miss Marlowe, I had hoped we might avoid unpleasantness tonight. So had I. Genevieve's gaze flicked toward the guests gathering near them. Unfortunately, Sir Leander believes silence has begun to injure him. Cordelia felt the room contract. Leander stood a short distance away. He appeared pale, grave, and terribly honorable. Then Sir Leander should speak, Cordelia said. I would prefer the story in his own words. Genevieve hesitated, perhaps because the invitation came too easily. Leander stepped forward. Miss Marlowe, I had no wish to embarrass you. You have had several days to discover a different method. A murmur passed through the nearest guests. Leander lowered his voice as though protecting her. On Thursday night, you asked to speak with me privately in the West Saloon? No. The answer came cleanly. I was sent there because Lady Genevieve told me my father had become ill. Sir Almeric turned sharply. Genevieve pressed a hand to her chest. I told you what I understood. You told me he was in the West Saloon, and that someone should find me. Cordelia looked at her father. Were you ill that night? Sir Almeric stared at Genevieve, confusion overtaking irritation. I was not. Genevieve recovered quickly. Then I was mistaken. But that does not explain why Sir Leander remained with you. He did not remain with me for 20 minutes. Leander sighed. Cordelia, there is little purpose in denying the duration. The use of her Christian name sent a ripple through the room. Maximilian's expression hardened, but he did not interrupt. Cordelia looked directly at Leander. Do not call me that. Forgive me, Miss Marlowe. Genevieve spoke gently. A maid saw you enter before 11. Another servant saw you leave when the West Saloon clock showed after 1:15. There it was. The trap revealed itself not in a confession, but in 2 perfectly respectable fragments. Cordelia remembered the dependable clock striking 11 as she stepped into the corridor. She remembered the blue face behind her reading approximately 17 minutes after. The West clock was wrong, she said. Someone near the fireplace whispered, convenient. Cordelia heard it. So did Maximilian. It had been repaired, Genevieve replied. Everyone knew His Grace had it regulated. Yes, Cordelia said, which is precisely why its reading matters. Leander gave a pained smile. Surely you see the difficulty. If the clock was accurate, you were alone with me for nearly 20 minutes. If it was inaccurate, someone altered it. Correct. And who would have had the greatest reason to do that? The question was designed to appear reluctant. Lady Ashendon's drawing room grew still enough for Cordelia to hear the violinist lower his bow. Leander continued, a woman determined to conceal how long she had been there. Sir Almeric took a step forward, but Cordelia raised one hand. No, father. She did not want his anger. She wanted the minutes. I entered shortly before 11. Sir Leander entered after me. I left when another clock nearby struck 11. We were alone together for scarcely 4 minutes. Genevieve looked sorrowful. Then you are asking everyone to believe that 2 servants are mistaken. No, I believe the servants may be describing exactly what saw. That answer disturbed the room more than denial would have. Leander's brows drew together. Then your explanation is that the facts do not yet fit. How very like you, Genevieve said softly. To make a puzzle of impropriety. Cordelia felt the blow. So did everyone else. Her intelligence had become motive. Precision had become calculation. The very quality men once complained would make her difficult to marry was now being used to suggest she could arrange disgrace with unusual efficiency. Leander stepped closer, though he remained at a proper distance. There is a simple way to end this. Cordelia knew what was coming before he said it. I am prepared to offer you marriage. Sir Almeric inhaled sharply. Several ladies looked almost relieved. A scandal had appeared, and a familiar remedy had presented itself. Leander continued with grave dignity. Whatever misunderstanding occurred, I will not allow your name to suffer. Cordelia stared at him. Then she understood the ugliest part of the trap. He expected gratitude. No. The word fell into the room without ornament. Leander blinked. You should consider what refusal means. I have. Cordelia, Sir Almeric whispered. She turned only enough to acknowledge him. A marriage offered because a man has helped create the disgrace that makes it necessary is not rescue. Leander's face lost color. You accuse me without proof, and you offer yourself as punishment without invitation. A few people looked down to hide their reactions. Maximilian moved then. He did not stand in front of Cordelia. He came to her side. Miss Marlowe has refused, he said. His voice was quiet, but rank made quietness travel. That ends the question of marriage. Leander stiffened. Your Grace, with respect, society may not consider the matter ended. Society may entertain itself as it pleases. It does not possess the authority to marry a woman against her will. Genevieve's expression tightened. Surely no one suggests force. Then we agree. Maximilian looked at Cordelia, not the room. Do you wish to leave? She felt the temptation. A carriage, darkness, silence. But leaving now would become another fact others arranged for her. No. His gaze held hers for one heartbeat. Then I'll stay. He did not touch her. He did not announce belief like a verdict. He simply remained beside her, while the room struggled to decide what to do with a woman who had refused both shame and rescue. Cordelia lifted her chin. There were not 20 minutes, she said once more, clearly enough for everyone nearest to hear. There were scarcely 4, and I intend to discover where the other 16 came from. Across the room, Genevieve's fan stopped moving. Maximilian said nothing, but the look he gave Cordelia was not pity. It was trust waiting for evidence. Later, before the first carriage was called, Genevieve found him alone near the music room doors. Your Grace, she murmured, this can all be finished by breakfast. Maximilian turned toward her. Genevieve smiled. If you are willing to be practical. Genevieve's version of practicality arrived the next morning in a sealed note, requesting a private conversation with the Duke of Greymere, and, by noon, Maximilian understood exactly what she meant. she came to Greymere House with her mother and asked to speak with him in a smaller drawing room while the Countess remained nearby. Genevieve did not waste time pretending innocence. "This has become ugly," she said, "and it doesn't need to become uglier." Maximilian stood beside the cold fireplace rather than sitting. "Go on. Everyone knows the West clock has been unreliable before. A servant may easily have misread it, or remembered the wrong moment. We say that plainly. Miss Marlowe's time with Sir Leander becomes a misunderstanding instead of a scandal." Maximilian watched her. "And the servant?" Genevieve's expression did not alter. "Dismissed quietly, with a decent reference, if you insist." "For doing what? For being mistaken." "You are remarkably certain that she was?" Genevieve's mouth tightened. "I'm offering a solution, Your Grace." "No, you are offering a victim." She exhaled through her nose. "Then call it a consequence. Households survive by keeping order. A young servant loses a place. Miss Marlowe keeps her reputation. You keep your political position clear of gossip. Sir Leander withdraws his offer. Everyone benefits except one girl who can find another situation." Maximilian hated how swiftly his mind began arranging the proposal into manageable pieces. That was the worst part. He could see how easily it would work. A servant's faulty recollection, a repaired clock with an old reputation, a quiet dismissal, Cordelia restored to polite society before the scandal hardened into certainty. No prolonged whispers, no questions about why the Duke of Greymere continued courting a woman accused of clandestine meetings. No political opponent using the matter to suggest poor judgment. It was clean, efficient, almost elegant. Genevieve saw something in his silence and leaned closer. "There is one other condition." Maximilian's attention sharpened. "Of course there is. Miss Marlowe must withdraw from your courtship." "Why?" "Because otherwise no one will believe this is finished. If you continue pursuing her, the story becomes that Greymere forced a servant to lie in order to protect the woman he intends to marry. I have not asked Miss Marlowe to marry me. Society has eyes. Society also has an appetite for invention." Genevieve looked at him steadily. "Then starve it, walk away, let her name recover, let mine recover, let Sir Leander's recover. By next month, everyone will have found something else to discuss." Maximilian thought of Cordelia at the musicale saying there had been scarcely 4 minutes. He thought of her refusing Leander's offer, while half the room waited for gratitude. He thought of the servant Genevieve was willing to sacrifice because servants had fewer rooms in which to defend themselves. "I will give you my answer after I speak with Miss Marlowe," he said. Genevieve's composure slipped for the first time. "Why?" "Because the reputation you propose saving belongs to her." By late afternoon, Maximilian was at Marlowe House. Sir Almeric received him with such restrained fury that courtesy looked painful. Cordelia entered with her aunt and immediately knew the visit concerned more than comfort. Maximilian did not soften the offer before giving it to her. He told her exactly what Genevieve had proposed. The servant would be blamed for misreading the West clock. The dismissal would be quiet. The scandal would be called an unfortunate misunderstanding. Sir Leander would withdraw his marriage offer. Cordelia would be expected to end the courtship with Maximilian. Cordelia listened without interruption. When he finished, she asked only one question. "Which servant?" Genevieve did not name her. Then she does not even care which girl carries the blame. Sir Almeric crossed the room. "Cordelia, if this ends the matter," she turned toward him, "would it end it for the servant? She could be found another place." With a dismissal for unreliability attached to her name? Sir Almeric fell silent. Domestic service depended upon references. They all knew it. Cordelia looked back at Maximilian. And you considered this? He could have protected himself with indignation. Instead, he answered truthfully for several minutes. Her face changed, not with betrayal, with attention. Why? Because it would work. Yes, and because I know what another week of this may cost you. And the servant? Too much. Cordelia studied him for a long moment. Maximilian felt more exposed beneath that quiet gaze than he ever had before Parliament. What did you tell Lady Genevieve, she asked, that I would answer after speaking with you? Something in Cordelia's shoulders eased. Barely. You asked? I nearly did not, but you did. Maximilian extended one hand instinctively, palm open between them. He remembered the terrace, her hand in his, the permission she had given him to court the woman who already existed. Cordelia looked down at his offered hand. She did not take it. Her mind was elsewhere now, moving toward the problem. Maximilian lowered his hand without embarrassment, without injury. Cordelia noticed that too. I will not purchase my reputation with a servant's livelihood, she said. Then neither will I. Sir Almeric rubbed a hand over his face. What do you propose instead? Cordelia looked toward the window, but Maximilian recognized the expression. She was arranging facts. I want to see the West Saloon again. Of course, Maximilian said. And the clock. Yes. I want to know who serviced it, when it was checked, and whether anyone saw it keeping the correct time earlier that evening. Sir Almeric frowned. Cordelia, surely His Grace's steward can make those inquiries. He can. She looked at Maximilian. But I would rather decide whom I speak to, and in what order. Then you will. No hesitation. You may use Greymere House as necessary. I will tell the steward that no servant is to be questioned, dismissed, threatened with dismissal, or instructed what to remember without your knowledge. Cordelia's eyes met his. That is more power than I asked for. Then tell me the boundary. Access. No pressure. Agreed. No one loses a place merely for telling the truth badly. Agreed. And if we discover nothing? Sir Almeric asked. Cordelia's expression remained steady. Then we will still have refused to ruin someone weaker in order to make ourselves comfortable. The answer struck Maximilian with unexpected force. He had admired her precision. He had been drawn to the calm certainty with which she refused stupidity, disguised as courtesy. But this was different. Her intelligence was not merely sharp. It was governed. She would not use it to climb over someone more vulnerable. That mattered more than any clever answer she had ever given him. The next morning, May 30th, Cordelia entered Greymere House with her aunt and Sir Almeric. Maximilian met them in the hall, then led them toward the West Saloon. He stopped before the door. The room is unchanged. Cordelia nodded. Good. Inside, the blue-enamel clock stood on the mantel, innocent in appearance. Its hands now matched the hall timepiece. Cordelia did not approach it immediately. She looked first at the doors, then at the distance to the corridor, then at the position from which a servant carrying a tray might have seen the clock. Who repaired it after the first supper? She asked. My clockmaker, Maximilian said. He regulated it on May 8th. And after that, no repair was requested. Cordelia finally approached the mantel. I want to speak with him. You shall. And the butler? Yes, and whichever servant was told to watch this clock that night. Maximilian's expression sharpened. You think someone told her? I think people do not usually remember the minute on a mantel clock 4 days later unless the minute mattered to them at the time. Sir Almeric looked at his daughter as though seeing the shape of her mind from a new angle. Cordelia did not notice. She was staring at the blue clock. Maximilian said, "There is something else." She turned. The steward checked the household book this morning. The clockmaker was here on May 23rd. Cordelia went still. The day of the gathering? Yes. Why? A routine adjustment to another timepiece. Before leaving, he checked the west clock. Because I had asked that it be watched after the earlier fault. Cordelia's eyes moved back to the blue-enamel face. Was it accurate? According to him, yes. The room seemed to quiet around them. Cordelia stepped closer to the mantel, not touching the clock. Then it did not simply drift 16 minutes in the course of an evening. Maximilian watched the certainty settle into her expression. "No," he said. It did not. By June 1st, Cordelia had stopped thinking of the scandal as a question of reputation. Reputation shifted too easily beneath the weight of a whisper. Facts were less graceful, but they stayed where one put them. She returned to Greymere House shortly after noon with her aunt, Sir Almeric, and a notebook she had brought for dates rather than arguments. Maximilian met them in the morning room, where the windows stood open to a mild breeze, and the household moved with the subdued awareness of servants who knew their employer's guests had become the subject of London conversation. "I have asked no one any questions since Saturday," he told Cordelia. "The clockmaker is waiting downstairs. The butler is available when you want him. The servants have been told only that they may answer you freely." Cordelia nodded. "Thank you. Where do you want to begin?" Sir Almeric asked. "With you." Her father blinked. "Me? Lady Genevieve used your name to send me into the West Saloon. I want the entire evening from your perspective, and I want it before anyone else's account influences yours." Sir Almeric stared at his daughter for a moment, then slowly sat. Something in his expression changed. He was accustomed to advising Cordelia, correcting her tone, worrying over her future, or explaining how society worked. He was less accustomed to being examined by her with complete seriousness. "Very well." Cordelia sat opposite him. Maximilian remained near the window, close enough to hear, but making no attempt to lead. "Where were you at 10 minutes before 11, huh?" she asked. Sir Almeric frowned in concentration. "In the card room." "With whom?" He named 2 gentlemen and an elderly viscount. "Did you leave before 11? "No." "Did you feel faint?" "Certainly not." "Did you ask anyone to find me?" "No." His voice hardened. "Did you ask Lady Genevieve to find me?" "No." "Did you enter the West Saloon at any point that evening?" "Not once." Cordelia wrote each answer. Sir Almeric watched the pencil move. "Cordelia." She looked up. "I should have asked you this the night it happened." Regret pulled at his features. "Instead, I was so angry at the insult that I never asked how the insult had been constructed. You believed me. Of course I believed you. Belief is not the same as asking." He absorbed that quietly. Cordelia did not mean it as rebuke, yet she saw him recognize the difference. For years, Sir Almeric had believed his daughter clever, while continuing to joke that cleverness made her difficult. Perhaps belief, she thought, was sometimes only affection waiting to become respect. Maximilian said nothing. He seemed to understand that this part belonged to father and daughter. Cordelia turned back to her notes. Then Lady Genevieve's message was false from the first moment. "Yes," Sir Almeric said. "Entirely false." "The clockmaker came next, Mr." Beale entered with his tool case in one hand and enough nervousness for 3 men. Cordelia did not ask him whether he believed the scandal. She asked what he knew about the clock. "You regulated the blue-enamel clock on May 8th? Yes, Miss Marlowe. Why? His Grace requested it after it had been found running fast. 7 minutes, approximately. Did you move it from the West Saloon? No, miss. I worked on it there, and after you finished, it agreed with the hall clock. Did you see it again before the evening of May 23rd? Yes, I was called to the house that afternoon for another clock. His Grace had asked that I keep an eye on the blue one for a while, so I checked it as well. Cordelia glanced at Maximilian. He gave only the smallest nod. The fact had been established already, but she wanted it in the clockmaker's own words. Was it accurate, she asked, within what I would call proper household tolerance, less than a minute difference? Could a clock functioning normally gain 16 minutes between afternoon and 11 at night, then later return close to correct time without adjustment? Mr. Beale looked startled. Not like that, miss. It might gain or lose gradually if something were wrong. It would not advance by that amount and then correct itself. Could touching the hands alter the displayed time without damaging the movement? Yes. Would that leave obvious evidence afterward? Not necessarily. Cordelia wrote nothing for several seconds. She did not need him to say more. The clock proved manipulation was possible. It did not prove who had done it. Thank you, Mr. Beale. That is all. Maximilian did not ask a single additional question. That restraint did not escape her. The butler came after luncheon. Mr. Ellis was a composed man with the particular memory required of someone responsible for a ducal household. He confirmed that, before guests began moving toward supper on May 23rd, he had checked the hall timepiece while coordinating service. Did you notice the West Saloon clock? Cordelia asked. Yes, miss. I passed through the room shortly before 10. It agreed closely enough that I had no reason to remark upon it. So the clock was not 16 minutes fast then? No, miss. The chain tightened. Accurate earlier. False message shortly before 11. Wrong reading when Cordelia left. Correct again afterward. Yet she still lacked the mechanism by which society had been prepared to remember the false time that came from a young housemaid named Mary Hale. She entered pale with anxiety, twisting her apron before remembering herself and stilling her hands. Cordelia deliberately lowered her own notebook. You are not in trouble, she said. No one will dismiss you because you remember imperfectly. I only want what you actually recall. Mary glanced at Maximilian. He spoke from near the fireplace. Miss Marlowe directs the questions. Answer her as you would answer me. Mary swallowed. Yes, Your Grace. Cordelia began with the musicale night rather than the scandal. Were you carrying a tray near the West Saloon? Yes, miss. Madeira and water. Why there? Lady Genevieve told me guests might want refreshment in the quieter rooms. Cordelia's pulse changed. Exactly what did she tell you about timing? Mary thought. She said not to go in too early. She said to wait until the west clock had passed, quarter after. Sir Almeric shifted sharply. Cordelia kept her voice level. The west clock specifically? Yes, miss. Not the hall clock? No, miss. She pointed toward the saloon and said, wait until that clock is past quarter after, then take the tray along. Cordelia looked down at her notes. There it was, not merely an unreliable recollection, an instruction designed to make a particular clock matter. When you later said you saw me leave after quarter past, Cordelia asked, you meant after quarter, passed by the west clock. Yes, miss. Did you know the hall clock had only just struck 11? Mary's face fell. No, miss. I was in the side passage. I didn't hear it clearly. You have done nothing wrong. Mary's eyes filled with relief. Cordelia closed the notebook. The trap had not required everyone to lie. That was its elegance. One person saw her enter before 11. Another used the altered clock to place her exit after 1:15. 2 truthful memories created one false story. Maximilian came nearer only after Mary had gone. 2 time references, Cordelia said. Yes, one reliable, one manipulated. Sir Almeric stared at the closed door, and Genevieve made certain the servant used the manipulated one. Cordelia nodded. For the first time, her father looked at her not as a daughter whose reputation needed saving, but as a woman solving something others had failed to see. Before any of them could speak again, Mr. Ellis returned. His expression was unusually grave. "Your Grace, there is another matter." Maximilian looked at Cordelia before answering. "Tell Miss Marlowe." The butler inclined his head. "One of the footmen has remembered something from that night." He saw Lady Genevieve return alone toward the West Saloon several minutes after Sir Leander came out. Cordelia felt the final piece of the day settle into place. Not proof, not yet, but opportunity, and somewhere beyond Greymere House. Sir Leander had already begun telling anyone willing to listen that only a woman as clever as Cordelia Marlowe would have known how to alter a clock and blame the minutes themselves. On June 4th, Maximilian asked Cordelia to meet him in the smaller morning room at Greymere House because he had something to confess that had nothing to do with the blue clock. Her aunt remained in the adjoining room with the door open, close enough for propriety and far enough to leave them privacy of tone. Cordelia had spent the morning reviewing notes until every fact of May 23rd sat in her mind with the clean edges of pieces placed correctly on a table. Genevieve had given the false message. Sir Almeric had never been ill. Leander had entered the West Saloon after Cordelia. The clock had been accurate earlier. It had shown approximately 16 minutes fast when Cordelia left. Genevieve had specifically instructed a servant to watch that clock. A footman had seen her return to the room after Leander emerged. The chain was tightening. Yet, when Cordelia entered, Maximilian did not begin with evidence. He stood near the window, with one hand resting against the frame, his expression more guarded than she had seen it in weeks. "You look as though Parliament has discovered another way to disappoint you," she said. "This is worse. That is ambitious." He smiled faintly, but the humor disappeared almost at once. "I have been thinking about Genevieve's offer." Cordelia closed the door only as far as propriety allowed and moved nearer. "The servant bargain?" "Yes, you already rejected it. I know." Maximilian looked at her directly. "But I want you to know that I was tempted." Cordelia said nothing. She had already heard him admit as much at Marlowe House. But there was something different in the way he spoke now. Less like a fact, and more like an examination of himself. "Not because I doubted you," he continued. "I didn't. I was tempted because I could see how quickly it would end the scandal. One girl dismissed, one explanation accepted. Your name repaired before London decided the accusation was more interesting than the truth." Cordelia folded her hands loosely before her. "You feared delay. I fear what delay can cost." He crossed the room by 2 measured steps, then stopped before he crowded her. "Most of my adult life has trained me to prevent damage before it spreads. A disputed appointment, an estate quarrel, a political rumor. If I hesitate, other men fill the silence with whatever version benefits them most. So I learned to act early, decisively, and with enough authority that the argument ends before it grows. And that works, often, which makes the dangerous occasions harder to recognize." His gaze sharpened. Exactly. The answer seemed to surprise him, though perhaps only because she had named the thing he was still trying to name himself. Maximilian looked down briefly. When Genevieve offered me that arrangement, I saw the shape of a solution before I saw the person it would crush. That frightened me. Cordelia felt some of the distance inside her shift. You did see her eventually. Eventually is not a noble word. No. He gave a short breath that almost became a laugh. You do make comfort difficult. You would distrust me if I made it easy. I would. Silence gathered between them, not strained, but full. Cordelia watched the tension in his shoulders. What are you asking me for? She said. Nothing. He met her eyes. That is the point. I wanted you to know the truth about the temptation, even though telling you gains me nothing. The words reached her more deeply than an apology would have done for a wrong he had not committed. He had not sacrificed the servant. He had not decided for Cordelia. He had brought the choice to her, listened and accepted the harder path. Yet he still believed integrity required naming how close convenience had come to persuading him. Cordelia had known men who confessed only after discovery. Maximilian was confessing before anyone could accuse him. You asked? She said softly. His expression changed. Yes, that mattered. It did not feel like enough. It was enough to keep you from becoming the man you're afraid of. Maximilian's jaw tightened. And if next time I ask too late, then I will tell you. Immediately, his mouth curved. The severity left his face for one heartbeat. Then the concern returned. Cordelia, I cannot command the truth into existence. No, I cannot repair your reputation by announcing that I believe you. No, and I cannot make the facts fit because I am a duke. That would be convenient. Infuriatingly. She smiled. You are learning. Painfully. He looked toward the small writing table where Cordelia's notes rested. Shall we review what we actually have? That shift mattered too. Not what he had, what they had. Cordelia moved to the table. Maximilian remained beside rather than across from her. They did not touch. The false illness message comes first, she said. Genevieve sends me to the West Saloon using my father's name. Sir Almeric confirms he never asked for me. Established. Leander is there within approximately 1 minute of my arrival. You enter at 10:57. He enters at 10:58. I leave at about 11:01, and Leander leaves around 11:03. Cordelia nodded. At my exit, the west clock shows approximately 11:17, 16 minutes fast. But earlier that evening it was correct. Mr. Beale confirms he checked it that afternoon. Mr. Ellis remembers it, agreeing with the hall clock before 10. Cordelia tapped one finger against the page. Mary Hale is told by Genevieve to wait until the west clock passes 1/4 before taking the tray through that corridor, which makes the false clock reading memorable. Yes, then Genevieve returns to the West Saloon after Leander leaves. The footman places her there at roughly 6 minutes past 11. Cordelia drew a slow breath, and shortly afterward, the clock is close to correct again. Maximilian looked at the sequence. It is nearly complete. Nearly is important. What is missing? A direct witness to the hand on the clock. We may never have one. Then we must not pretend we do. He turned toward her. You would present the case without one, if the ordinary facts are strong enough. The clock does not need to tell us who touched it. It only needs to show that someone did. Genevieve's false message, her instruction to Mary, and her return to the room supply motive and opportunity. Leander supplies the staged encounter. Yes, but I do not want the final case to depend on anyone saying, His Grace believes this, Therefore it must be true. Maximilian's expression softened with something like pride, though he was careful not to make it patronizing. Good, good. I want my rank removed from the proof wherever possible. Cordelia looked at him. That may be the most intelligent thing you have said. I shall record the date. She laughed. The sound loosened something inside both of them. Maximilian lowered his voice. There is one thing I can do. What? Make certain no servant loses a position for speaking honestly. No threats, no altered references, no rewards tied to testimony. If they choose to speak, they do so because they were asked what they saw. Cordelia considered him carefully. That is protection. I hoped so, without ownership. I am trying. The admission was so unguarded that her chest tightened. She had seen his competence, his restraint, his authority. This was different. This was a powerful man, allowing her to see the fear beneath all three. Cordelia stepped toward him. Maximilian went still. She did not ask him to explain further. She did not make him earn comfort through prettier words. She simply closed the distance and wrapped her arms around him. For a fraction of a second, he did not move. Then, only after her choice was unmistakable, his arms came around her with careful warmth. The embrace was neither urgent nor possessive. It was relief given shape. Cordelia rested her cheek lightly against his coat and felt the breath leave him. I am still going to correct you, she murmured. I would be disappointed if you stopped. She drew back first. His hands released her immediately, though his eyes remained on hers. Neither of them tried to turn the moment into something more. Not yet. The scandal still waited. Truth still had work to do. A knock sounded at the outer door. Maximilian's secretary entered after permission, carrying a folded note. Your Grace, this was delivered from Sir Leander Carroway. Maximilian opened it, read, and the warmth in his face disappeared. What is it? Cordelia asked. He handed her the note. Leander had begun telling several acquaintances that Greymere's clockmaker could hardly be considered an independent witness when the Duke himself paid his accounts. Cordelia read the final line twice, then looked up. So now the clockmaker has been bought. Apparently. Maximilian's voice was cold. Cordelia folded the note and placed it beside her chronology. Good. He stared at her. Good. He has finally told us what his last defense will be. By June 7th, Sir Leander Carroway had discovered that the easiest way to weaken evidence was not to disprove it, but to attach a powerful man to it. By luncheon, 3 drawing rooms had heard some version of the same argument. The Duke of Greymere controlled the household. The Duke of Greymere employed the clockmaker. The Duke of Greymere wished to protect Miss Marlowe. Therefore, anything discovered beneath the Greymere roof must be treated as suspect. Cordelia listened to the report at Marlowe House without surprise. He has finally chosen the argument we expected, she said. Sir Almeric paced before the fireplace. He is suggesting that Greymere has manufactured evidence. Maximilian stood near the window, his expression controlled. Not directly. He is suggesting that my influence makes honest evidence impossible. Which is cleverer, Cordelia said. Her father stopped. You sound almost admiring. I am admiring the strategy, not the man. Her aunt sat nearby with embroidery abandoned in her lap. The room held none of the panic that had filled it a week earlier. The facts had begun to give everyone something steadier than reputation. Cordelia looked at Maximilian. Then we remove you. Sir Almeric frowned. Remove his grace from what? From the proof, wherever possible. Maximilian understood immediately. Good. Sir Almeric looked from one to the other. You are both remarkably calm about this. Cordelia crossed to the writing table, where her chronology lay open. The stronger our case becomes without ducal authority, the less Sir Leander can say that rank created it. She touched the first line. My father was not ill. His grace is unnecessary to that fact. Sir Almeric gave a short nod. I can say so myself. Mary Hale was told by Lady Genevieve to watch the West Saloon clock. Cordelia moved to the next line. Her memory does not depend upon Maximilian. The use of his Christian name came naturally now, though only in private family company. Maximilian noticed. He did not smile, but warmth passed through his eyes. The footman, who saw Genevieve return to the West Saloon after Sir Leander left, also needs nothing from me, he said. Exactly. Cordelia tapped the final unresolved point. The only place your household still appears essential is the actual hour. Sir Almeric folded his arms. The hall clock, still Greymere property. The clockmaker, paid by Greymere. Maximilian leaned one shoulder against the window frame. Then we find a time source outside my house. Cordelia looked at him. There was a neighboring household awake that night. Their servants were still receiving carriages. Ashburn House, Sir Almeric said. Across the square. Cordelia nodded, and the parish clock can be heard from that side of the street when the night is clear. Maximilian's expression sharpened. You heard a clock strike 11 when you left the West Saloon. Yes, I assumed at first that it was the hall clock because the sound came from that direction through the corridor. But I did not see the face. I only heard 11 strikes. Then we should not call it the hall clock if you cannot prove it was. Cordelia looked at him with quiet approval. That is precisely what I was going to say. His mouth curved. I am learning. They spent the afternoon not gathering dramatic evidence, but removing assumptions. A footman from Ashburn House asked through proper household channels, remembered opening the front door shortly before the parish clock struck 11 for a late arriving guest. His master's long case clock, visible from the entrance hall, had agreed within a minute. The detail mattered because the guest had apologized for arriving at the hour and had checked his own watch while speaking. None of those people had any connection to Cordelia, Maximilian, or the Greymere scandal. Their memories existed before the question reached them. Cordelia wrote the sequence carefully. We do not need them to prove that Genevieve touched the clock, she said. We need them only to anchor 11 outside Greymere House. Maximilian nodded. And Mr. Beale proves only that the blue clock was accurate earlier. Nothing more. No mechanical certainty about who altered it. No convenient mark on the hands. No. Sir Almeric gave an exasperated breath. You both sound almost pleased to have less evidence. Cordelia looked at him. No. We are pleased to have cleaner evidence. That evening, after Maximilian had left Greymere business behind and returned to Marlowe House for a brief call, the final plan was simple enough to fit on one sheet. Sir Almeric would state that he had never been ill and had never summoned Cordelia. Mary Hale would state that Genevieve had instructed her to use the West Saloon clock. The footman would state that. Genevieve returned to the room after Leander left. Independent household and parish time would establish that 11 had truly arrived when Cordelia said it had. Mr. Beale would establish only that the blue clock had been accurate earlier that day and could not naturally gain 16 minutes and then restore itself so quickly. No single fact proves the entire scheme, Maximilian said. Cordelia looked at the page between them. That is why the whole is stronger. Ordinary facts overlap. And if Genevieve and Leander give the same explanation, then it must fit every minute. And if they do not, Cordelia met his gaze, then they will do more damage to each other than we could. Her aunt had moved to the adjoining room, leaving the door partly open as she sorted correspondence at a small desk. The arrangement was proper, though the quiet between Cordelia and Maximilian felt more private than any empty room. He looked at her for a long moment. "You have built the case, so that my title is unnecessary. That was the point. Most people spend years trying to make my title necessary. You have unfortunate acquaintances. I have one fortunate one." Cordelia felt the air change. There was no crisis now to hide behind. No witness waiting to be questioned. No servant livelihood hanging on their next sentence. Justice was not finished. But the truth had become strong enough to stand for a night without being held upright. Maximilian stepped closer, then stopped. "Cordelia, yes? I do not want to mistake trust for permission." Her breath caught. "You haven't. May I kiss you?" The question was quiet. No teasing, no assumption. Cordelia looked at him and understood with startling clarity that the answer belonged entirely to her. She could refuse, and nothing essential between them would be punished for it. That was precisely why she did not want to refuse. "Yes," she said. "You may." Maximilian remained still for the smallest moment, as though giving her one final opportunity to change her mind. Cordelia closed the remaining distance herself. His hand lifted only after she moved toward him. Resting lightly at her upper arm, the kiss was brief and warm, restrained by both the open door and the tenderness of something neither wished to rush. There was no triumph in it, no claim. Only recognition made physical. When they parted, Cordelia stayed near him, her pulse unsteady in a way no arithmetic could correct. Maximilian looked almost as surprised as she felt. "Was that acceptable?" he asked softly. Cordelia smiled. "Barely." His answering laugh was quiet. "I see I shall have to improve. Not before June 11th. Cruel woman. Disciplined woman." His expression gentled. "That too." Cordelia glanced at the chronology on the table. "We still have one advantage." "Which is?" "Leander thinks he is attacking your influence." She looked back at Maximilian. "He does not yet understand that the truth no longer needs it." On June 11th, the blue-enamel clock in the West Saloon kept perfect time while half a dozen people prepared to argue about what it had shown 19 days earlier. Greymere House had not been arranged like a court, and Maximilian had refused anything resembling one. There were no barristers, no magistrate, no formal accusations read from paper. Only the people whose reputations had been touched by the scandal, several respected guests who had heard the original charge, and the household witnesses whose ordinary memories had become important because two clever people had counted on no one ever comparing them. Cordelia stood near the West Saloon mantel with Sir Almeric at one side and her aunt several steps behind. Maximilian remained farther away than anyone expected a man in love to stand. He had promised not to turn his rank into proof. Cordelia had believed him. Now he gave her the room and kept his silence. Lady Genevieve Ashendon sat rigid beside her mother. Sir Leander Carroway stood near the windows, his expression arranged into weary patience. The blue clock ticked between them all. Cordelia did not begin with accusation. "I am going to ask you to accept 4 ordinary facts," she said. "None requires anyone to believe me because his grace does. None depends upon a confession." Leander smiled faintly. "A useful precaution." Cordelia looked at him. "Yes." His smile disappeared. She turned first to her father. "Sir Almeric, on the evening of May 23rd, were you ill shortly before 11? "I was not." "Did you ask Lady Genevieve to find me?" No. Did you ask anyone to send me to the West Saloon? No. Cordelia faced the room. That is the first fact. Lady Genevieve told me my father was ill in this room. He was not. Genevieve lifted her chin. I have already said I misunderstood what I was told. We will return to what you were told. Cordelia did not press. She moved instead to the second fact. Mr. Beale. The clockmaker stepped forward, visibly uncomfortable in company far above his usual sphere. Cordelia kept her questions simple. You checked this clock on May 23rd? Yes, miss. Earlier that day? Yes. Was it approximately 16 minutes fast? No, miss. It was keeping time properly. Could it naturally gain 16 minutes before 11 and then return close to the correct hour soon afterward? Not without adjustment, miss. Cordelia nodded. Thank you. She did not ask who had touched it. That omission seemed to unsettle Leander more than accusation would have done. The second fact, Cordelia said, is that the clock was accurate earlier that day and could not have gained 16 minutes, and corrected itself naturally within so short a period. Leander folded his arms. Still no proof of who altered it. Correct. A murmur moved through the room. Cordelia saw Maximilian's eyes warm at the answer. She continued. The third fact concerns the time when I left this room. Mary Hale entered from near the door, pale but steady. Cordelia asked, on that evening, did Lady Genevieve give you an instruction about refreshments? Yes, miss. What instruction? She told me to wait until the West Saloon clock was past 1/4 before taking a tray toward this side of the house. Genevieve's mother turned toward her daughter. Cordelia did not. The West clock specifically? Yes, miss. Thank you. Cordelia looked at the assembled guests. When I left this room, the clock showed approximately 17 minutes past 11. That reading became part of the story that I had been alone with Sir Leander for nearly 20 minutes. But another household across the square had a long case clock, agreeing with the parish hour. Their footman received a late guest as 11 struck. I left this room at approximately that same time. Leander laughed once. You expect us to build innocence from clocks in neighboring houses now? No, I expect us to accept that 11 o'clock existed independently of Greymere House. Someone near the back suppressed a cough that sounded suspiciously like laughter. Cordelia did not smile. The fourth fact concerns what happened after I left. Sir Leander remained here for approximately 2 additional minutes. He then left. A Greymere footman saw Lady Genevieve return alone toward the West Saloon several minutes later. Shortly afterward, this clock was again close to the correct time. Genevieve rose. That proves nothing. I told the footman I had misplaced my fan. Yes. Cordelia turned to Leander. Sir Leander, perhaps you can explain something for me. If I can, how does a clock that is accurate earlier in the evening become 16 minutes fast during the few minutes surrounding our encounter, then return close to the correct hour? Soon after, Lady Genevieve enters the room. Someone moved the hands. I agree, you had access to the clock. So did you. His face tightened. Then your case proves only that any of us might have altered it. No, the clock proves only that someone did. That is all I have ever claimed. Cordelia shifted her gaze to Genevieve. But the clock is not the beginning of the trap. Your message is. Genevieve's color changed. I was mistaken. Who told you my father was ill? A servant. Which servant? Silence. You said you misunderstood something you were told. Who told you? Genevieve's mouth opened, then closed. Mary Hale spoke unexpectedly from the side of the room. Begging your pardon, my lady, but you told me yourself that Miss Marlowe had to be sent to the West Saloon. You didn't mention anyone else. Genevieve turned sharply. You are confused. Mary swallowed. No, my lady. Leander stepped in. This is absurd. Even if Lady Genevieve gave the message, that does not prove I arranged anything. Cordelia looked at him. Then, why did you enter the West Saloon 1 minute after I did? Chance. And why did you immediately revive a marriage interest my father had already declined? Because I was concerned for you, before there was a scandal to be concerned about. The room went still. Leander's expression hardened. You knew Greymere interest would make you careless. Genevieve turned toward him. You said the meeting only needed to be long enough for people to believe she had arranged it. Leander stared at her. The words had escaped in anger before she understood what she had revealed. Genevieve realized it an instant later. That is not what I meant. It is exactly what you meant, Leander snapped. You were the one who chose the clock, because you said her reputation was already vulnerable. Silence fell so completely that the blue clock could be heard ticking on the mantel. Cordelia did not need to speak. The contradiction had become confession only after the facts had already closed around them. Leander looked from face to face and understood that there was no graceful retreat left. Genevieve sat down without elegance, for the first time Cordelia had ever seen. Maximilian moved only then. He did not come to Cordelia first. He faced the room. Miss Marlowe owes Sir Leander no marriage, no apology, and no silence. Mary Hale will not lose her position for obeying an instruction or for telling the truth about it. There is no contemplated alliance between House Eversham and House Ashenden, and I will not ask anyone here to accept Miss Marlowe's innocence merely because I am Duke of Greymere. His gaze moved to Cordelia. She has shown you the facts herself. Sir Almeric stepped forward before anyone else could speak. His face held more shame than Cordelia had expected. There is something I must add. He looked at his daughter. Weeks ago, I told Cordelia she was too clever for a husband. I said it as a joke. I told myself affection made it harmless. His voice roughened. It was not harmless. I helped teach people that her intelligence was a defect. When this scandal came, that old prejudice made the lie easier to believe. Cordelia felt her throat tighten. Sir Almeric bowed his head to her. I was wrong. No applause followed. Cordelia was grateful. Genevieve's father rose with frozen dignity and informed the room that his daughter would leave London before the week ended. Maximilian quietly stated that the social expectation connecting Ashendon and Greymere was finished. Leander was informed by Sir Almeric that no marital or financial connection with the Marlowe family would ever be considered. Before the gatherings dispersed, enough men who had once welcomed Leander's company understood that his attempt to pressure Cordelia through scandal had also been an attempt to reach a fortune through marriage. His punishment did not require prison or melodrama. Doors would close. Credit would tighten. Invitations would vanish. The very society he had tried to manipulate would remember. Only after the room emptied did Maximilian come to Cordelia. Her aunt and Sir Almeric remained in the adjoining room, visible beyond an open doorway. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Maximilian said, I love you, Cordelia, not because you are clever enough to expose a lie. I love you because you never use what you see to make another person smaller. The words struck deeper than the public vindication had. Cordelia looked at the man who had asked for acting, admitted temptation before discovery, and stood beside her without turning his title into her voice. I love you, Maximilian, and I won't pretend not to see what I see. His expression softened with something almost fierce in its tenderness. I'd never ask it." Cordelia reached for his hand. He waited until her fingers settled around his before closing his own. No room watched now except the people who loved them enough to look away. For the first time in years, Cordelia did not feel clever, difficult, unmarried, vindicated, or watched. She felt chosen without being reduced. And she knew with equal certainty that she was choosing him too. By early September, London had found newer scandals to feed upon, which Cordelia considered one of society's more useful habits. Lady Genevieve Ashenden had left town before June ended. Sir Leander Carraway's name still appeared occasionally in conversation, though less often with admiration than with the careful silence reserved for men whose invitations had begun to disappear. Mary Hale remained employed at Greymere House with her reference untouched. Mr. Beale returned to his clocks. Sir Almeric stopped making jokes about his daughter's mind. None of those things happened dramatically. That pleased Cordelia. Justice, she had discovered, did not always require thunder. Sometimes it meant that a servant kept her place, a lie lost its audience, and a father learned to choose different words. Maximilian did not propose the day after the scandal. He did not propose the week after it either. He continued calling at Marlowe House properly. They rode in Hyde Park with her aunt or Sir Almeric nearby. They attended 2 dinners and 1 musicale, where everyone pretended not to remember the previous one. He asked Cordelia what she thought and continued disagreeing, often enough to prove that respect was not a temporary courtship trick. She corrected him when he deserved it. On one occasion, she corrected him when he did not, then apologized. He looked so delighted by the apology that she nearly withdrew it. 3 weeks after June 11th, he asked her to walk with him in Sir Almeric's small rear garden, while her aunt sat near the open drawing-room doors. He did not kneel on damp gravel or produce a speech prepared for witnesses. He simply stopped beneath an old lime tree and said, "I have spent several weeks trying to decide whether asking you now would be haste." Cordelia looked at him, and, "I've concluded that I am still capable of haste, but this is not it. That sounds suspiciously confident. Then correct me if necessary." She smiled. He took a breath. "Cordelia, I love you. I want a life with you in which your agreement is never purchased by my title, and your disagreement is never treated as disloyalty. Will you marry me?" She had once imagined that if any man ever asked, her first thought would be whether marriage required surrender. Instead, her first thought was that Maximilian had spent months proving he understood the question beneath the question. "Yes," she said. His face changed with such open relief that she laughed. "That was very dignified, Your Grace. I am trying not to alarm the neighborhood. You're failing." He lifted one hand but waited. Cordelia placed hers in it. "I love you too," she said, "and I reserve the right to tell you when you are wrong. I would consider anything less a breach of promise." Their marriage settlement was negotiated without urgency and without disguise. Sir Almeric read every clause with more attention than he had ever given one of Cordelia's suitors. Cordelia read them too. Maximilian never once suggested that the legal arrangements were too complicated for her. When she questioned one provision concerning her personal expenditure, his solicitor looked instinctively toward the Duke. Maximilian merely said, "The Duchess-to-be asked the question." Cordelia nearly married him on the spot for that sentence alone. Instead, she waited until the properly arranged ceremony in London, several weeks later, when she became Cordelia Eversham, Duchess of Greymere, before witnesses who had known her as Sir Almeric Marlowe's too clever daughter, and now watched her choose a husband without becoming less herself. The wedding was dignified rather than enormous. Sir Almeric's voice shook only once. Her aunt cried discreetly and denied it afterward. Maximilian looked at Cordelia during the vows as though rank, guests, candles, and centuries of family expectation had all receded beyond the reach of attention. Cordelia felt no triumph in becoming a duchess. She felt choice. That was better. Several mornings after the wedding, she woke before sunrise in Greymere House and found herself too alert to remain in bed. The city beyond the curtains was still grey. Servants moved quietly somewhere below, beginning the long, invisible work that made an aristocratic household appear effortless. Cordelia wrapped a dressing gown over her nightclothes, slipped her feet into soft shoes, and took the small glass prism from the green baize sleeve in her drawer. It had remained hers through every change in name and household. She carried it upstairs to the small observation room Maximilian had shown her after their marriage. It was not a grand scientific chamber. There were no impossible instruments or theatrical domes, only a broad eastern window, a sturdy table, several shelves, a terrestrial globe, and enough clear morning light to make the room feel larger than it was. Cordelia stood at the window as the first gold edge of sunrise appeared above the roofs. She set the prism on the table and adjusted it carefully. White light entered the glass and broke across the wood in a narrow band of color. Violet, blue, green, gold, red. Cordelia smiled. "I thought I might find you here." Maximilian's voice came from the doorway. She turned. He wore a dark dressing gown and looked less like the Duke of Greymere than any version of him society ever saw. "Were you searching?" "Not very hard. You've been here 4 mornings out of 5. That sounds like surveillance. Marriage has made me reckless." He entered, but did not touch the prism. "May I?" "You may look. A severe restriction. You are married now. Discipline is important." He came to stand beside her. The colored light crossed the table between them. Maximilian placed his hand in the bright strip and watched red and gold fall across his skin. "Remarkable. You have seen it before. Not like this." Cordelia looked at him. "It is the same prism." "I wasn't." The simplicity of the answer quieted her. Months earlier, he had been a man surrounded by agreement and trained to solve problems. Before anyone else could complicate them, she had been a woman who had made peace with never marrying because too many men had admired intelligence only until it contradicted them. Neither of them had become entirely different. That, perhaps, was the point. Love had not replaced their natures. It had made room for them. Maximilian glanced toward the floor below. "I have a question." "That sounds dangerous." "Now that you are Duchess of Greymere, do you intend to stop correcting my clocks?" Cordelia regarded him solemnly. "No." He released a breath of exaggerated relief. "Thank God. Although I may begin charging for the service, send the account to my steward." "With pleasure." Somewhere below, the blue enamel clock in the west saloon began to chime. The sound rose through Greymere House, clear and even. Cordelia counted without intending to. The hour was correct. Maximilian heard her faint laugh. "What? Nothing. That usually means something." "The clock is right." "A triumph for civilization. Do not become overconfident. Never while you are in the house." Cordelia looked at the colored light spread over his hand. Then she laid hers beside it. Their fingers touched. This time there was no startled withdrawal, no uncertainty about what the contact meant. She threaded her fingers through his. Maximilian closed his hand around hers only after she had chosen the hold. "Still acceptable," he asked. Cordelia leaned closer, barely. He laughed softly, and she moved into his arms before he could make another joke. The embrace was warm, familiar now, yet no less deliberate for being married. Maximilian held her without hurry. Cordelia rested against him for a moment, then drew back just enough to look at his face. "I do love you," she said, "even when you are wrong. That is fortunate, because I remain gifted in the area. You are improving. High praise." Cordelia kissed him before he could turn the moment into wit. It was brief, affectionate, and entirely chosen. When she stepped back, his expression held the same astonished warmth she had seen after their first kiss at Marlowe House. "Was that correction or encouragement?" he asked. "Neither." "Then I am lost." "Good." She looked toward the prism, where one beam of light still divided into many colors across their joined hands. Cordelia had not found a husband by becoming easier to admire, quieter to live with, or less certain of what she saw. She had found love only after she stopped looking for a man who required any of those things. And Maximilian had found a wife who would never confuse devotion with obedience. Below them, the West Saloon clock kept perfect time.